Guten Tag, Lab. This is Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we start a new unit as we go over Unit 1, Day 1. And let's start off with our daily punishment. What was Forrest Gump's password? One Forrest, one. One Forrest, one. Yeah, it's like people put numbers in their password. It's a joke. All right, your key terms for today are Abbasid, Persianization, caravan, Sufis, Sultan, Latin cell, Mameluke, Purda, harem, the Christian Reconquista, Crusades, and the House of Wisdom. We're going to go over the political history of the Abbasid dynasty, economic developments in the Muslim world, and social and cultural interaction in the Muslim world, Crusades, culture, gender, etc. So let's start talking about the Abbasid dynasty, which does start in this unit. This unit is post-classical period, 1200 to 1450. The Abbasids were 750 to 1258, so they bled into this dynasty, at least the very end of the Abbasid dynasty did. The Abbasids showed no special favor towards the Arab militaries. If you remember, the Umayyad dynasty used the Arabs to govern their empire. The Abbasids relied on Persians to run their empire, and they used Persian governmental techniques, Persian bureaucracy to run their empire. The title of the advisor in the Abbasids was the Vizier, the royal Vizier. If you ever saw the Disney movie Aladdin, Jafar was the Vizier, so that's a Persian title. The central authority was ruled from the court of Baghdad. The Abbasids created Baghdad. It was a newly built city. They were Sunni Muslim. They will decline by 1258 before they'll eventually be conquered by the Mongols in 1258. The most famous Abbasid ruler was Harun Rashid, and after he died, his sons fought a civil war to see who would lead next. The Abbasids will become more decentralized, and you're going to see the local military commanders start to take over power in the Abbasids, and they'll take the title of Sultan and claim to be ruling under the emperor, even though they were just kind of building their own fiefdoms. There will be popular uprisings and peasant rebellions, which will also weaken the dynasty. We will have a changing economic development during this time. Merchants, pilgrims, and travelers will exchange food across the empire. The Abbasids will be located in the Middle East, parts of Central Asia. Muslim world will stretch all the way to Spain, Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa. So you're going to see these food products spread throughout multiple continents. You'll see the exchange of food and industrial crops, sugarcane, rice, spinach, artichoke, eggplants, oranges, lemons, limes, bananas, coconuts, watermelons, mangoes, cotton, indigo, and henna. Some of the effects of this new changing economics is you'll have industrial crops, you'll have the basis for a thriving textile industry, we'll have foodstuffs being shipped all over the Abbasid empire, so you'll have people that will be getting new food that will be very nutritional, so it will lead to increased health, increased population in cities. There's going to be a vast trade zone for the Abbasid empire. They'll use camels and caravans. They'll trade through routes like the Trans-Saharan trade route, Mediterranean Sea, the Silk Road. They'll use long caravans to do their land-based trade routes. They'll borrow technology from other civilizations for their maritime trade or their sea-based trade. They'll borrow from the Arabs and the Persians. They'll get the magnetic compass from the Chinese. The Latin sail they'll get from Southeast Asia and India to sail in the Indian Ocean. The astrolabe they'll get from the Hellenistic mariners. They will dominate trade in North Africa, across the Sahara, down the Nile, Southwest Asia to India, Eastern Mediterranean, Red Sea, Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf, and down the coast. You'll see a spread of exchange of ideas, including Islam, technology, and culture. And during this time, Islam, the Abbasid, the whole Islamic world, will be the wealthiest area in the world. You'll just see a thriving of economics. One of the new groups that's going to develop during this time are the Turks. They originated in Central Asia, Mongolia. The first Turks we're going to talk about were the Seljuk Turks. They converted to Sunni Islam while in Central Asia. In 1037, they're going to migrate to Iran and set up a sultanate, claiming to be still loyal to the Abbasid dynasty. In 1055, they capture Baghdad, later Jerusalem. In 1071, they will defeat the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, and they'll start to occupy Turkey. The sultans will be military commanders. They're going to leave the Abbasid emperors, caliphs, as in charge as figureheads. Some of the soldiers that the sultans will develop are called Mamelukes. Mamelukes will be slave soldiers. They were Turkish slave soldiers that will be fighting for the sultans. That will be the strength of the Turkish military. Women's rights will change, not necessarily in a positive way. Before Islam, Arab women were, nomadic. They had a lot of rights. Women could often be poets, tribal leaders. The Quran did enhance rights for women. Muhammad made it clear that men had to love their wives. It forced husbands to honor contracts, love their women. It allowed women to own property. It protected them from exploitation. Out of all the monotheistic beliefs, Islam was probably the most egalitarian one. What's going to change is over time, Islam will interact with foreign cultures and they will start to take on those cultural ideas. So from Mesopotamia and Persia, they'll get the idea of purdah, which is like veiling, like covering yourself. Women will have to cover themselves. It's called purdah. Purdah is like where they're covered basically all of themselves. Purdah is also used as a term for when women, they did this in India, they would have to be isolated in their own room and like there'd be like kind of a veil or a screen that would be isolating them from other people. The other thing that they would adopt is harems. Harems are where the emperor would have many concubines. He wouldn't even have wives. He'd have concubines. They'd all stay in the same room. They wouldn't be able to leave that. They'd be served by eunuchs. A lot of times the emperor's concubines would fight with each other. They try to poison each other's rivals so that their kid would become the next emperor. That's going to be called harem politics. Over time, women will lose their rights in the Islamic world through the hadith. A lot of times it's the less reliable aspects of the hadith and cultural traditions. Islam is going to spread in many different ways. Islamic mystics called Sufis are going to be effective missionaries, and they're going to help Islam spread through South and Southeast Asia. Islam will spread during the Rashidun period through war, through the Middle East. It will spread through trade in Africa, and in South and Southeast Asia, it will spread through trade and Sufis. Harun al-Rashid will create a new library, university, intellectual center called the House of Wisdom. It was originally a library that held scrolls from all over the world. It was one of the largest libraries in the world. They appointed scholars and intellectuals. It's going to lead to the world in advances in science, math, optics, and astronomy. One of the key figures in the House of Wisdom was Al-Khwarizmi, who was called algebra, and he's the father of, get it, algebra. Islam will be influenced by foreign cultures. They'll be influenced by Persians. After the Arabs, the Persians were the most prominent of Muslims. Some of the Persians will be early followers of Shia Islam. Many of the advisors, vizier, were Persian. You're going to see a whole literary development in Persian. The Arabian Nights, which has the story of Aladdin, is a Persian story. That's Persianization, taking Persian ideas. You'll see Turkish influence. The Mamelukes were the Turkish soldiers during the Abbasid dynasty. You'll see an Indian influenced. Purdah and harem were ideas borrowed from Hindus. They also borrowed the numeric system, which was Hindi's. We actually call the numeric system Arabic numerals, but it actually comes from India originally. They will also borrow ideas from the Greeks. Greek writing will get to the Muslim world, and they really like Aristotle and some of the Greek philosophers. So they will translate the Greek writers, Aristotle, Plato, and that's why when the Roman Empire falls and a lot of the writing is destroyed, the reason we still have it today is because we eventually retranslate it from Arabic and Persian, because the Muslims kept the writing. Last thing that's going to happen is there is going to start to be religious war between Muslims and non-Muslims. The name of a religiously sanctioned war is called the jihad, which is going to happen. But at first, it was the Christians that are fighting religious wars against the Muslims. An example of this is the Christian Reconquista, where the Christians will reconquer Spain from the Muslims, Spain and Portugal. Another example of this is the Crusades. The Crusades started in 1098 when the Muslims that were controlling Jerusalem were taxing them and were not really allowing the Christians to go on their pilgrimage. The Roman Pope will declare a crusade against the Muslim. He'll offer indulgences for anybody that fights against the Muslims. An indulgence is that if you do this, your sins will be forgiven and you'll spend less time in purgatory. Basically, buy your way to heaven. There'll be more than 9 crusades. In the first crusade, the Christians will get the Holy Land, they'll get Jerusalem. After that, they'll gradually lose all their land. The crusades are not really important because they're a failure, but the reasons why the crusades do matter, not as a military thing, the reason why they matter is because the crusades allowed for contact between the Muslim world and Western Europe. It allowed for the spread of new ideas, goods, and trade. And it's going to open up Western Europe from goods and technology from the East, from the Middle East. All right, guys, that's all I have for you for today. Deuces. Deuces, deuces.